It's April 24th, 1915, and in the dead of night, Turkish police are breaking down doors across Constantinople. They're arresting 250 of the most prominent Armenian intellectuals, politicians, and community leaders. Most of these men will never be seen alive again. What started as a single night of arrests would escalate into one of the 20th century's most devastating genocides, the systematic extermination of over 1 million Armenians. But here's what most people don't know. This wasn't a spontaneous outbreak of violence. This was a calculated plan decades in the making, orchestrated by a secretive political organization that would stop at nothing to create their vision of a pure Turkish state. The Armenian Genocide didn't happen overnight. It was the culmination of rising nationalism, economic resentment, and an empire in crisis. By the time it was over, an entire civilization that had existed for over 2,000 years had been nearly wiped from the map. Today, we're uncovering the shocking truth behind why the Armenian Genocide happened. We'll explore the toxic mix of factors that led to this tragedy, the secret organization that orchestrated it, and how World War I provided the perfect cover for mass murder. This is a story of betrayal, systematic violence, and how quickly a society can turn against its own citizens. To understand why the Armenian Genocide happened, we need to go back to the 19th century Ottoman Empire. Picture this. You're living in one of the world's most powerful empires, but it's literally falling apart around you. The Ottomans had lost 60% of their territory during the 1800s, and after the devastating Balkan Wars, they lost another 80% of their European lands. Millions of Muslim refugees were pouring into what remained of the empire, many of them bitter and traumatized from being ethnically cleansed from their former homes. But here's where it gets interesting and tragic. The Armenians, who had been called the loyal millet for centuries, suddenly found themselves in an impossible position. They were Christians in an increasingly Muslim nationalist state. They were economically successful in a time of economic crisis, and they were seeking reforms just as the empire was becoming more authoritarian. The 1878 Congress of Berlin had promised Armenian reforms, but Sultan Abdulhamid II saw these as a threat to Ottoman sovereignty. His solution? The Hamidian massacres of 1894 to 1896, which killed over 150,000 Armenians. This was, in the words of one historian, a dress rehearsal for what was to come. In 1908, everything changed. A revolutionary group called the Young Turks overthrew the Sultan in what seemed like a progressive revolution. Armenians initially celebrated. Finally, they thought there would be equality and reform. They couldn't have been more wrong. The real power behind the Young Turks was a secretive organization called the Committee of Union and Progress, or CUP. These weren't liberal reformers. They were radical Turkish nationalists who believed in something terrifying, that Turkey should be for Turks only. The CUP was led by three men who would become known as the Three Pashas: Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Jamal Pasha. But the real architect of the genocide was Talat Pasha, a former postal clerk who had risen to become the empire's most powerful man. Here's what's chilling. The CUP had already tested their methods. In 1914, they secretly organized the deportation of Greeks from the Aegean coast. When that succeeded, They knew they could do the same to the Armenians on a much larger scale. When World War I broke out, the CUP saw their opportunity. War provides the perfect cover for genocide. You can claim national security, control information, and eliminate witnesses. The trigger came in January 1915 at the Battle of Sarıkamış. Enver Pasha led a disastrous winter offensive against Russia that resulted in the deaths of over 60,000 Ottoman soldiers. Rather than take responsibility for this military catastrophe, Enver blamed Armenian treachery. This was a lie. The few Armenian soldiers who had deserted were no different from soldiers of any ethnicity fleeing a hopeless battle. But it gave the CUP the excuse they needed. On February 25, 1915, the Ottoman General Staff issued Directive 8682, ordering all Armenian soldiers to be disarmed and transferred to labor battalions. These men were then systematically executed, the first victims of the genocide. Here's where the CUP's plan becomes truly diabolical. They called it deportation and resettlement, but it was designed to be a death march. In May 1915, the Ottoman Parliament passed the temporary law of deportation, giving the government the right to deport anyone they deemed a threat to national security. On paper, it applied to everyone. In practice, it was used almost exclusively against Armenians. The deportations followed a systematic pattern. First, Armenian men were arrested and killed. Then women, children, and elderly were forced to march hundreds of miles to concentration camps in the Syrian desert. Along the way, they were robbed, raped, and murdered by both soldiers and local Kurdish and Circassian tribes. Those who reached the camps faced starvation, disease, and continued massacres. The CUP had created what one German official called a machine of extermination. They even recycled the deportation routes, sending new groups of Armenians along paths littered with the bones of previous victims. But this wasn't just about nationalism or religion. There was a massive economic motive that historians are only now fully understanding. The CUP had embraced something called national economy, the idea that the economy should be controlled by the national group, meaning Turks and Muslims. Armenians, despite being Ottoman citizens for centuries, were seen as foreign economic competitors. When Armenians were deported, their property was immediately confiscated. Homes, businesses, bank accounts, even personal belongings. Everything was seized and redistributed to Muslims. The CUP created a massive wealth transfer program disguised as wartime necessity. Some of the most valuable real estate in the Ottoman Empire simply changed hands overnight. The presidential palace of modern Turkey, for example, was confiscated from an Armenian businessman in 1915. So why did the Armenian Genocide happen? It wasn't a single cause, but a toxic combination of factors: a collapsing empire, radical nationalism, economic greed, wartime chaos, and most importantly, a secretive organization with the will and power to implement their genocidal vision. The CUP succeeded in their goal of creating a more homogeneous Turkey. By 1918, over 90% of the Ottoman Empire's Armenians were gone. An ancient civilization had been nearly erased from its homeland. The tragedy is that this genocide was entirely preventable. It required planning, organization, and the complicity of thousands of people. But it also shows us the warning signs we must watch for. When governments start dividing people into us and them, when economic resentment is weaponized against minorities, and when radical ideologies capture state power. Today, Turkey still denies this genocide occurred, despite overwhelming historical evidence. But the truth cannot be buried forever. The Armenian Genocide stands as a stark reminder of what happens when hatred, nationalism, and unchecked power combine. What do you believe are the warning signs that may signal the onset of genocide in our time? When should we be concerned, and how should we respond? These questions are not merely theoretical. They are essential for awareness, prevention, and collective responsibility. If this historical account has offered new insight, I encourage you to explore other documented cases of systematic violence and the deeper forces behind them. Understanding the past may be our only true defense against repeating it.